At a roadside gas station on a scorching summer afternoon, a blind military veteran is viciously mocked by three young men while pumping gas. Bystanders turn away, pretending not to notice. But when the rumble of 45 motorcycles fills the air and a wall of leather-clad Hell's Angels surrounds the scene, the bullies realize they've made a terrible mistake. What happens next will expose a truth so powerful it changes an entire community forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Miller's Gas and Go, a small roadside station just off Highway 49. Heat shimmered in waves above the pavement, distorting the air and making everything beyond 20 feet look like it was underwater. The gas pumps stood in a row like silent sentinels, their digital displays flickering in the bright light. Inside the attached convenience store, the air conditioning hummed steadily, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with the sweet chemical scent of air freshener. Robert Mitchell, Bobby to anyone who'd known him before, stood beside pump number 3, one hand resting lightly on the roof of his weathered pickup truck, the other holding the nozzle as it clicked and whirred, feeding fuel into his tank. He wore faded jeans, work boots that had seen better days, and a plain grey t-shirt that hung loosely on his lean frame. On his face sat a pair of dark wraparound sunglasses that never came off, not even indoors. His military dog tags hung around his neck, catching the light occasionally as they swayed with his movements. Bobby was 42 years old, though the lines around his mouth and the silver threading through his close-cropped hair made him look older. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate a world he could no longer see. His hand never left the truck's surface, using it as a guide, his fingers reading the metal like braille. When the pump clicked off, he felt for the lever, replaced the nozzle with practiced ease, and twisted the gas cap back into place, all while his other hand maintained contact with the vehicle. He had lost his sight 7 years ago in Kandahar. An IED had torn through his convoy on what was supposed to be a routine supply run. 3 of his brothers in arms hadn't made it home. Bobby had survived, but the blast had stolen his vision in an instant, turning his world from light into an endless, impenetrable darkness. The doctors at Walter Reed had told him he was lucky to be alive. Lucky. He'd heard that word so many times it had lost all meaning. After 2 years of rehabilitation, learning to use a cane, memorizing his apartment layout, and adjusting to a life he'd never imagined, Bobby had returned to his hometown of Greenfield. It wasn't the same place he'd left, or maybe he wasn't the same person. Either way, nothing fit the way it used to. He'd taken a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, lived on his disability checks, and tried to carve out some kind of existence that felt like living rather than just surviving. Today, he'd driven out to this gas station 20 minutes from town because he could, because he refused to be imprisoned by his disability. He'd modified his truck with hand controls and auditory signals, passed the necessary tests, and earned back the right to drive on certain roads during daylight hours. It was a small freedom, but it was his, and he guarded it fiercely. Bobby reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen twice to activate the voice assistant. "Directions to Miller's Gas and Go convenience store entrance," he said clearly. The phone's synthetic voice responded, guiding him step by step. He folded his white cane from his other pocket, he always kept it close, and began tapping his way toward the building. The electronic chime sounded as the door opened ahead of him, and he felt the rush of cool air against his skin. His cane swept left and right in practiced arcs, mapping the space in his mind. 3 steps forward, a display rack to his left, the counter somewhere ahead and to the right. "Afternoon," came a voice from behind the register. Eddie Ramirez, the owner, a man in his 50s with a thick mustache and an apron stained with motor oil. "Afternoon, Eddie," Bobby replied, orienting himself toward the sound. "Just need to pay for pump 3. "You got it, Bobby. $28.50. Bobby pulled out his wallet, specially organized with bills in different compartments, and handed over 2 20s. He heard the register drawer slide open, felt the bills and coins pressed into his palm, and pocketed the change by touch. "You doing all right out there?" Eddie asked, his tone careful, the way people spoke to Bobby now, like he might shatter if they said the wrong thing. "I'm fine, Eddie. Same as always." "All right then. You take care now." Bobby nodded and turned back toward the door. He was almost there when he heard it, a low snicker from somewhere near the front window. Then another voice, younger, laced with amusement. "Dude, check it out." Bobby's jaw tightened. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before in a dozen different places. The grocery store, the post office, the diner on 5th Street. It was the sound of people who saw him not as a man, but as a spectacle. He pushed through the door and stepped back into the oppressive heat. His cane tapped along the pavement as he made his way back toward his truck. Behind him, he heard the door chime again, followed by footsteps and muffled laughter. "Yo, hold up!" Bobby kept walking. His hand found the side mirror of his truck, and he traced his way along the vehicle toward the driver's door. "Hey, I'm talking to you, man." The voice was closer now. Bobby stopped, his hand still on the truck. He turned his head slightly in the direction of the voice, but said nothing. 3 young men had followed him out of the convenience store. Derek was the tallest, mid-20s, with a backwards baseball cap and a shirt 2 sizes too small for his frame. Kyle stood beside him, shorter and stocky, arms crossed over his chest like he was trying to look intimidating. Austin, the youngest of the 3, leaned against one of the gas pumps, grinning like this was the most entertainment he'd had all week. "Must be tough, huh?" Derek said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Not being able to see where you're going." Bobby's fingers tightened around the cane. "I'm managing just fine." "Oh, I bet you are," Derek continued, stepping closer. "That's a pretty sweet setup you got. Special parking, disability checks. Bet you don't even have to work." Kyle chuckled. "Yeah, man." Living the dream. Bobby felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, the old anger that he'd learned to bury deep. He'd spent years in the service protecting people like this, and now they stood here mocking him for the sacrifice he'd made. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get in my truck," Bobby said evenly, his voice calm despite the storm brewing inside him. Sure, Derek said, but he didn't move. "Just one question, though. How do you even drive that thing? I mean, you can't see, right? That's got to be illegal or something." Austin laughed louder now, slapping his knee. "Dudes out here playing bumper cars." Bobby turned away from them, reaching for the door handle. His hand found it, pulled it open. Whoa, hold on," Derek said, his tone shifting to something sharper. "We're just trying to have a conversation here. No need to be rude." Bobby paused, half inside the truck. "I'm not being rude. I'm leaving. See, that's what I mean," Derek continued, playing to his friends now. "No respect. Guy probably thinks he's some kind of hero." Bobby's hand hovered over the steering wheel. Every fiber in his body wanted to turn around, to say something, to make them understand what they couldn't possibly grasp. But he'd learned long ago that words didn't reach people like this. They saw what they wanted to see. He pulled himself into the driver's seat and reached for the door. "Hey, don't forget your little stick," Kyle called out, his voice thick with laughter. Bobby froze. His cane. He'd left it leaning against the truck when he'd opened the door. Before he could react, he heard the scrape of it being dragged across the pavement. Then Kyle's voice again, this time doing a mocking imitation. "Oh no, where's my cane? I can't see. Somebody help me!" The laughter that followed was loud and cruel, echoing across the gas station lot. Inside the convenience store, Eddie looked up from the register. He saw what was happening through the window, saw the 3 young men circling Bobby's truck, saw one of them waving the white cane in the air like a trophy. Eddie's hand hovered over the phone. He should call someone. He should go out there. But he didn't. He looked back down at the register, pretending he hadn't seen anything. A woman pumping gas at pump 5 glanced over, her expression troubled. She met her husband's eyes. He shook his head slightly. "Not our business." They finished fueling in silence and drove away. Bobby sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He could hear them laughing. could hear the scrape of his cane being tossed around like a toy. Every instinct told him to get out, to face them, but what would that accomplish? They had his cane. He couldn't see them. He'd be defenseless, so he sat, and he waited. And he felt the weight of every pair of eyes that looked away. The sun continued to beat down. The air shimmered. And in that moment, Robert Mitchell felt more alone than he had since the day the bomb went off and the light disappeared forever. Derek tossed the white cane to Kyle, who caught it with a grin and held it up like a baseball bat, swinging it through the air in exaggerated slow motion. "Batter up!" he called out, and Austin doubled over laughing, slapping his hand against the gas pump. Bobby heard every word, every laugh, every scrape of his cane against the concrete. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, the kind of breathing they'd taught him in the service to keep calm under fire. But this wasn't combat. This was something worse in its own way, a different kind of enemy, one he couldn't fight back against without becoming the villain in someone else's story. "Come on." "Man, give it back," Bobby said, his voice steady but firm. He opened the truck door and stepped out, one hand keeping contact with the vehicle's frame. "Give what back?" Derek asked, his tone mockingly innocent. "Oh, you mean this?" The sound of the cane tapping against metal rang out as he dragged it along the side of Bobby's truck, leaving scratches Bobby couldn't see, but could definitely hear. Bobby's jaw clenched. That truck was one of the few things he could still control in his life. He'd saved for months to get it modified properly, to regain even a fraction of the independence he'd lost. And now this punk was scratching it like it was nothing. "That's my property," Bobby said, taking a step forward, his hand sliding along the truck's surface. "I'm asking you nicely to return it." "Oh, he's asking nicely," Kyle said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Guys, should we give the blind man his stick back?" "I don't know," Austin chimed in, pushing off from the gas pump and walking closer. "Maybe he should say please." "Did your mama teach you manners, blind man?" The words hit Bobby like physical blows. He'd faced insurgents, survived explosions, watched friends die in his arms. But somehow, standing in a gas station parking lot while 3 cowards mocked his disability, felt like a new kind of torture, one designed specifically to make him feel powerless. Inside the convenience store, Eddie watched through the window, his hand now resting on the phone. His conscience screamed at him to do something, but his survival instinct whispered caution. These kids looked like trouble. What if they came back later? What if they vandalized his store? He'd worked too hard to build this business to risk it over a confrontation that wasn't really his problem. A truck pulled up to pump 7. The driver, an older man in coveralls, began fueling his vehicle. He glanced over at the scene unfolding near Bobby's truck, his brow furrowing. For a moment, it looked like he might say something. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He focused intently on the numbers climbing on the pump display, as if they were the most fascinating thing in the world. Derek stepped closer to Bobby now, close enough that Bobby could smell the cheap cologne and cigarette smoke clinging to him. "You know what I think?" Derek said, his voice low and menacing. "I think you're faking it. I think you can see just fine and you're just working the system. Disability fraud. That's what this is." Bobby's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I lost my sight saving my convoy from an IED. I earned every cent of my benefits, and I sure as hell don't need to justify myself to you." "Oh, here we go," Kyle groaned dramatically. The hero speech. Everyone's a hero these days, aren't they? "Yeah," Austin added. "My cousin went to Iraq. He came back fine. No problems. So what makes you so special?" The casual dismissal of his sacrifice, the reduction of his service, and his injury to nothing more than a claim of victimhood made Bobby's blood boil. But he forced himself to remain calm. Getting angry was what they wanted. They were looking for a reaction, something they could use against him. "I'm not claiming to be special," Bobby said quietly. "I'm just trying to get my cane back so I can go home." Derek laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "See, that's the thing. You people always want something, always got your hand out. Maybe if you tried a little harder, You wouldn't need that cane at all. My grandpa's blind in one eye, and he gets around just fine." The ignorance was staggering. Bobby wanted to explain that complete bilateral blindness was nothing like partial vision loss, that he'd spent years in rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world he couldn't see, that every single day was a battle against a disability that never took a day off. But he knew it would be pointless. These men didn't want to understand. They wanted to feel superior. Kyle spun the cane like a baton, nearly dropping it before catching it again. "Oops, almost lost your precious stick there." That would have been tragic. A minivan pulled into the gas station, a mother with 2 small children visible through the windows. She parked at pump 2 and got out, immediately noticing the scene. Her children pressed their faces against the window, watching with wide eyes. The mother's face tightened with concern, and she looked toward the convenience store as if hoping someone inside would intervene. When no one emerged, she quickly began pumping her gas, keeping her body angled between her children and the confrontation, as if she could shield them from witnessing cruelty by simply standing in the way. "You know what the problem with this country is?" Derek continued, warming to his subject now, playing to an audience that consisted of his snickering friends and the handful of people pretending not to watch. "Too many handouts. Too many people living off the government while the rest of us work hard for everything we have." Bobby almost laughed at the irony. This kid, who probably still lived with his parents and whose biggest accomplishment was passing his GED, lecturing a decorated combat veteran about hard work. "I worked plenty hard," Bobby said, his voice tight. "I just did it in a place where people were trying to kill me." Yeah, we get it," Kyle said dismissively. "You're a soldier, big deal. Lots of people join the military. It's just a job, just a job." Those 3 words encapsulated everything wrong with this interaction. To them, service was transactional. You sign up, you get paid, you come home. They couldn't comprehend the weight of the oath, the bonds forged in combat, the pieces of yourself you left behind in the sand and blood of foreign lands. Austin grabbed the cane from Kyle and held it up high, out of Bobby's reach. "Come and get it, soldier boy. Let's see those fancy military skills in action." Bobby's training told him where the voice was coming from, approximately how far away. He could probably close the distance, maybe even get a hand on one of them. But then what? He'd be grabbing at someone he couldn't see, flailing in the dark while they danced around him and laughed. The humiliation would only deepen, so he stood there, his hands at his sides, his face a mask of forced calm. While inside he felt like he was back in that convoy, trapped in a situation spiraling out of control, helpless to stop what was coming. The man in coveralls finished pumping his gas and climbed back into his truck. As he drove away, he glanced one more time at Bobby, standing alone against 3 tormentors. For just a second his truck slowed as if he might stop. Then it accelerated, leaving the gas station behind, leaving Bobby behind. The mother with the minivan finished pumping and hurried her children back into the vehicle, not making eye contact with anyone. Within seconds, she was gone too. Inside the store, Eddie picked up the phone, then set it back down. He told himself he'd give it another minute. Just one more minute to see if the situation resolved itself. Derek stepped back, still holding Bobby's cane, twirling it slowly. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice taking on a false friendliness that was somehow worse than the outright mockery. "We'll give you your stick back. But first, I want to hear you say it. Say I'm a faker and I don't deserve my benefits." The demand hung in the air like poison. Bobby's entire body went rigid. Everything inside him wanted to refuse, to tell them exactly where they could shove their demands. But without his cane, he was trapped. He could try to feel his way back to his truck. Good attempt to drive away, but they'd probably just follow him. "Make it worse." "I'm not saying that," Bobby said, his voice like steel. "Then I guess you're not getting your cane back," Derek replied with a shrug. And in that moment, as Bobby stood in the blazing sun, surrounded by people who refused to help, facing men who saw his service and sacrifice as nothing more than a con, he felt the full weight of his invisibility, not because he couldn't see, but because no one was willing to truly look at him. The heat was becoming unbearable. Bobby could feel sweat trickling down his back, soaking into his shirt. His throat was dry, and his head was beginning to pound from standing in the direct sunlight without any way to orient himself properly. He'd lost track of exactly where his truck was in relation to where he stood. The sounds around him, the hum of distant traffic, the occasional ding of the gas pump, the cruel laughter of his tormentors, all blended together into a disorienting wall of noise. "Cat got your tongue?" Derek taunted, waving the cane just out of Bobby's reach. "Come on, war hero. Just say the words and you can have your stick back." It's not that hard. Bobby's mind raced through his options. He could try calling the police himself, but his phone was in the truck. He could attempt to walk away, but without his cane and without knowing exactly where he was in the parking lot, he risked walking into traffic or tripping over a curb. He was trapped and they knew it. "You know what I think?" Kyle said, leaning against Bobby's truck with his arms crossed. "I think he likes the attention. Probably goes around to different places just waiting for people to feel sorry for him." "Yeah," Austin agreed, kicking at a small stone on the pavement. "Professional victim. That's what they call people like him." Bobby's hands trembled at his sides. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took to restrain himself. In another life, in another situation, he could have handled all three of them without breaking a sweat. His military training had included hand-to-hand combat, situational awareness, threat assessment. But all of that training assumed he could see his opponents. Without his sight, he was just a man flailing in the dark. "Please," Bobby said, and he hated how the word sounded coming out of his mouth, small, defeated. "Just give me my cane back." Derek's grin widened. "Oh, now we're getting somewhere." He said, "Please. Did you guys hear that?" "I heard it," Kyle confirmed, his voice thick with mockery. "But I don't think he meant it." "Say it again, blind man." "Say it like you really mean it." A car pulled into the gas station, an older sedan with a dented front bumper. A woman in her 60s got out, her purse clutched tightly to her chest. She glanced at the scene unfolding near Bobby's truck, her eyes widening slightly. She looked toward the convenience store, then back at the three young men, clearly weighing whether to get involved. Bobby heard her footsteps, heard them slow as she approached, and for a moment, hope flickered in his chest. "Excuse me," the woman began, her voice uncertain. "Is everything all right here?" Derek turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, ma'am. Just having a conversation with our friend here." "It doesn't look fine," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "It looks like you're harassing this man." "Harassing?" Derek laughed. No, nothing like that. We're just talking. Right, Bobby?" The use of his name, which Derek must have overheard from the convenience store, felt like another violation, another way of asserting control. Bobby turned toward the woman's voice. "They have my cane," he said simply. "They won't give it back." The woman's face hardened. "Give him his cane right now." "That's cruel. You should be ashamed of yourselves." For a brief moment the dynamic shifted. Derek's smile faltered, and Kyle actually looked uncomfortable. But then Austin spoke up, his voice defensive and aggressive. "Why don't you mind your own business, lady? This doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone with a shred of decency," she shot back. "That man is a veteran. He served this country. And you're treating him like garbage." "Oh, here we go," Derek muttered, his confidence returning. "Another hero worshipper? Lady, you don't know anything about this guy. For all you know, he got discharged for stealing or something." The accusation was so baseless, so deliberately cruel, that Bobby actually felt a bitter laugh bubble up in his throat, but he swallowed it down. This woman was trying to help, and he didn't want her to get hurt or humiliated because of him. "Ma'am," Bobby said quietly, "I appreciate what you're trying to do. But it's okay. You don't have to." "It's not okay," she interrupted firmly. "And I'm not leaving until they give you your cane back." Derek's expression darkened. He stepped closer to the woman, using his height to intimidate her. "You really want to do this? You really want to make this a thing?" The woman held her ground, but Bobby could hear the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Derek said with a shrug. "Call them. We'll just tell them this blind guy was acting threatening and we were defending ourselves." Who do you think they're going to believe?" The woman pulled out her phone with shaking hands, but Bobby could hear the doubt creeping into her movements. She was scared, and she should be. These weren't rational people who would respond to reason or appeals to decency. "Ma'am, please," Bobby said, his voice low but urgent. "Just go. I don't want you to get hurt because of me, but please, just go." The woman hesitated, her finger hovering over her phone screen. Bobby could hear her rapid breathing, could sense her internal struggle. Finally, with a sound that might have been a sob or just frustration, she turned and walked quickly back to her car. Within moments, she was gone, leaving Bobby once again alone with his tormentors. "Smart lady," Derek said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Knew when to back off. Inside the convenience store, Eddie had watched the entire interaction. He'd seen the woman try to intervene, seen her walk away defeated. His hand was still on the phone, still hovering, but he didn't pick it up. What if he called the cops and they didn't come? What if they came and made things worse? What if the kids identified him as the one who called and came back for revenge? The excuses piled up in his mind, each one more flimsy than the last, but together they formed a wall that kept him frozen behind his counter. A delivery truck pulled up to the side of the building. The driver got out, clipboard in hand, and walked toward the store entrance. He passed within 10 feet of Bobby and the 3 young men. He saw everything. The cane being held just out of reach, Bobby's rigid posture, the mocking grins on the bullies' faces. The driver's step faltered for just a second, then he pushed through the door and disappeared inside. Bobby felt something break inside him, not his resolve, that had been forged in fire and couldn't be shattered by cowards like these, but something else. Some fundamental belief he'd held on to that people deep down were basically good. That when push came to shove, they'd do the right thing. He'd been wrong. "You know what?" Bobby said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Keep it, keep the cane. I'll get another one." Derek's grin faded slightly, as if Bobby's surrender had taken away some of the fun. "What's that? Giving up already?" "No," Bobby said, turning his face toward where he remembered his truck being. "I'm just done with this. Done with you." He took a step forward, his hand reaching out, searching for his truck's surface. His fingertips brushed against metal, and he used it to guide himself toward the driver's door. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Kyle called out. "We're not done with you yet." "I'm done with you," Bobby replied, his hand finding the door handle. "Not so fast," Derek said, and Bobby heard footsteps approaching quickly. A hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Bobby's military training kicked in automatically. Even without sight, his body remembered how to respond to a physical threat. His hand came up not to strike but to deflect, to create distance. But before he could complete the movement, he heard Derek yelp and stumble backward. "Whoa! Did you see that? He just assaulted me. This guy just attacked me." Bobby froze, his hand still raised defensively. "I didn't. You all saw it," Derek shouted, his voice pitched loud enough to carry across the entire parking lot. "This psycho just attacked me. He's dangerous." Kyle pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the cops. This is insane." Bobby's stomach dropped. He hadn't attacked anyone. He'd barely touched Derek, and only in response to being grabbed. But he knew how this would look. A blind man's word against 3 witnesses who would all tell the same story. The narrative was already being written, and he was cast as the villain. In the distance, growing closer by the second, Bobby heard something else. A sound that started as a low rumble and quickly grew into a thunderous roar. The deep, unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines. Lots of them. And they were heading straight for Miller's Gas and Go. The rumble grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the pavement and into Bobby's boots. He'd heard that sound before. The synchronized thunder of a motorcycle convoy, the kind that announced itself long before it arrived. But this wasn't just a few bikes. This was dozens of them, their engines creating a wall of sound that rolled across the parking lot like an approaching storm. Derek's cocky grin faltered as he turned toward the highway. Kyle lowered his phone slightly, his eyes widening. Austin pushed off from the gas pump and took a step back, his earlier bravado evaporating as the first motorcycle crested the rise and turned into the gas station. Then another appeared, and another, and another. They came in a steady stream, chrome and steel glinting in the afternoon sun, their riders clad in black leather vests covered in patches. The lead bike was a massive Harley-Davidson, its engine roaring as it slowed and pulled into the parking lot. Behind it, more bikes followed, 20, 30, 40, filling every available space until the entire gas station was surrounded by motorcycles and the men who rode them. Bobby stood perfectly still, his hand still on his truck's door handle, his head tilted slightly as he tried to process what was happening. He could hear them cutting their engines one by one, the sudden silence almost as overwhelming as the noise had been. Then came the sound of boots hitting pavement, dozens of heavy footfalls, the creak of leather, the jingle of chains and keys. "Holy," Kyle breathed, his voice barely audible. The lead rider dismounted and removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face framed by a thick grey beard. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept across the scene, Bobby standing by his truck, the three young men frozen in various states of shock, and the white cane lying on the ground where Derek had dropped it in surprise. Thomas Tank Wheeler was a man who commanded respect without saying a word. At 6'4" and built like the nickname suggested, he'd been riding with the Hells Angels for over 30 years. The patches on his vest told a story of brotherhood, loyalty, and a code that outsiders rarely understood. Behind him, 44 more riders had dismounted and were now standing in a loose semicircle, their presence filling the parking lot with an energy that was both intimidating and strangely protective. Tank's boots struck the pavement with deliberate, measured steps as he walked toward Bobby. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from Bobby's face to the dark glasses, to the military dog tags hanging around his neck, and finally to the cane on the ground. "Brother," Tank said, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried despite being barely above conversational volume. "You all right?" Bobby's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Don't look all right to me," Tank observed, his gaze shifting to the three young men who now looked like they wanted to melt into the pavement. "Looks like you've been having some trouble." "Nothing I can't handle," Bobby replied, though even he didn't believe the words as they came out. Tank bent down and picked up the white cane, turning it over in his large hands, examining it with the care someone might give a sacred object. He walked over to Bobby and placed it gently in his hand. "Every man needs his tools," Tank said quietly. "Nobody's got the right to take them." Bobby's fingers closed around the familiar grip of his cane, and he felt something loosen in his chest. Not quite relief, but something close to it. "Thank you." Tank nodded once, then turned his attention to Derek, Kyle, and Austin. The three young men had backed up against the convenience store wall, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They were outnumbered 15-1, surrounded by men whose very presence radiated danger. "So," Tank said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "which one of you boys wants to explain what's been going on here?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Kyle stared at his shoes. Austin had gone pale, his hands shaking visibly at his sides. "That's what I thought," Tank continued. He walked slowly toward them, and with each step they seemed to shrink smaller. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a veteran, a man who served his country and paid a price most of us can't imagine. And I see three punks who think it's funny to mock a man who can't defend himself. We weren't," Derek started, but Tank cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Don't," Tank said simply. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying. We've been watching from the road for the last 5 minutes. We saw everything. More motorcycles were still arriving, filling in the gaps, creating an impenetrable wall of leather and chrome. The gas station had become a fortress, and Derek, Kyle, and Austin were trapped inside it. One of the riders, a lean man with a scarred face and a vest that read "Nomad," stepped forward. "Boss, you want us to have a conversation with these boys?" Tank held up a hand. "Not yet, Ronnie. Let's give them a chance to do the right thing first." He turned back to the three young men. "You boys got something you want to say to this veteran?" Derek's voice came out as a squeak. "We were just messing around. We didn't mean anything by it. Didn't mean anything," Tank repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "You took a blind man's cane. You mocked his service. You cornered him when he couldn't defend himself. And you didn't mean anything by it?" The parking lot had gone completely silent, except for the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Even inside the convenience store, Eddie had come out from behind the counter and was standing at the window, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Another rider, a massive man who made Tank look small by comparison, took a step forward. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "In my day, disrespecting a veteran meant you answered for it, personally." "Still does, Big Mike," Tank agreed. "Still does." Kyle's phone buzzed in his hand, the 911 call he'd started earlier. He fumbled with it, nearly dropping it, and quickly hit the end button. "Gonna call the cops?" Tank asked, noticing the movement. "That's interesting, considering you boys were the ones causing the problem. But go ahead, call them, we'll wait. We've got nowhere else to be today. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The three young men exchanged panicked glances. They were trapped, and they knew it. If they called the police, they'd have to explain what they'd been doing. If they tried to run, they'd have to get past 45 bikers who looked like they'd be happy for the excuse. And if they stayed, they'd have to face whatever Tank decided was appropriate justice. "I asked you a question," Tank said, his voice dropping even lower. "You got something to say to this man?" Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. We're sorry." "To him," Tank corrected, pointing toward Bobby. "Not to me." The three young men shuffled forward, their eyes on the ground. Derek spoke first, his voice barely audible. "We're sorry. We shouldn't have done that." Bobby stood silent for a long moment, his hand resting on his cane. Part of him wanted to tell them exactly what he thought of their apology, that it was coerced, meaningless, born of fear rather than genuine remorse. But another part of him, the part that was just tired of fighting, simply wanted this to be over. "Apology noted," Bobby said flatly. Tank studied Bobby's face, reading what wasn't being said. He turned back to the three young men. "That's not good enough. You don't just get to say sorry and walk away. You need to understand what you did." A police siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone, maybe Eddie, maybe another witness, had finally called the law. Tank's expression didn't change. He simply crossed his arms and waited. "Looks like we're about to have company," he said calmly. "Good, I want them to see this. I want them to know exactly what happened here." Two patrol cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing, but sirens now silent. The officers stepped out cautiously, their hands resting near their weapons as they assessed the scene. 45 bikers, 3 terrified young men, and 1 blind veteran standing in the middle of it all, Deputy Carson Hayes. A 15-year veteran of the force with steel-grey hair and a reputation for fairness, approached slowly. His eyes moved from Tank to Bobby to the 3 young men backed against the wall. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" Carson asked, his voice steady but wary. Derek found his voice first, the words tumbling out in a rush. "These bikers are threatening us. They surrounded us and won't let us leave. That blind guy attacked me, and then they all showed up and—" "Stop," Carson said, holding up his hand. His gaze shifted to Tank. "That true?" Tank's expression didn't change. "No, sir. That's not even close to true." Deputy Carson Hayes studied Tank's face for a long moment, then shifted his attention to Bobby. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" Bobby straightened his posture, his military bearing returning despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "I stopped for gas. Went inside to pay. When I came back out, those 3, he gestured in the general direction of Derek, Kyle, and Austin, started mocking me. They took my cane and wouldn't give it back. They were harassing me for about 20 minutes before these gentlemen arrived. He's lying," Derek protested. "He grabbed me. He was acting all threatening and—" "Son," Carson interrupted, his tone sharp, "I'm going to stop you right there. Before you dig yourself any deeper, you should know that this gas station has security cameras. Multiple angles. So before you tell me your version of events, maybe you want to think real carefully about whether it's going to match what those cameras show. Derek's face went from red to white in the span of a heartbeat. Kyle made a small sound that might have been a whimper. Austin looked like he was going to be sick. Carson turned to Eddie, who had ventured out of the convenience store and was standing near the door. "Eddie, I'm going to need to see that security footage." "Yes, sir, Deputy," Eddie said quickly, already moving back toward the store. "I've got it queued up on the computer." I was about to call you myself." Tank made a sound that might have been a laugh or a grunt of disbelief. "That right? Because from where I was standing, looked like you were doing a whole lot of watching and not much else." Eddie's face flushed, but he didn't respond. He disappeared into the store and Carson followed, leaving his partner, a younger officer named Torres, to keep watch over the scene. Inside the convenience store, the computer monitor glowed with the paused footage. Carson leaned in as Eddie pressed play. The timestamp showed the events from 30 minutes earlier. The footage was damning. It showed Bobby entering the store, paying for his gas, leaving peacefully. Then it showed the three young men following him out, their body language aggressive from the start. It captured Derek taking the cane, Kyle waving it around mockingly, Austin dragging his leg in cruel imitation. It showed the woman who had tried to intervene and been driven away. It showed Bobby's defensive reaction when Derek grabbed him, a reaction that clearly came only after physical contact was initiated by Derek. Most importantly, it showed 20 minutes of harassment with no intervention from anyone except the Hells Angels, who had arrived to even the odds. Carson watched it all in silence, his jaw tightening with each passing moment. When the footage ended, he turned to Eddie with an expression that made the store owner take a step back. "You watched all that happen and didn't call us?" Carson asked quietly. I was going to, You just what? Waited to see if it would get worse? Hoped it would resolve itself?" Carson shook his head. "We'll talk about this later." He walked back outside, his face set in grim lines. The parking lot was exactly as he'd left it, 45 bikers standing in silent solidarity. 3 young men who looked like they wanted to disappear. And Bobby Mitchell standing tall despite everything he'd been through. "All right," Carson announced. "I've seen the footage, and I'm going to tell you all right now how this is going to go." He pointed at Derek, Kyle, and Austin. "You 3 are under arrest for harassment, theft, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait!" Derek interrupted desperately. "You can't arrest us. We didn't do anything." "That video doesn't show. It shows everything." Carson cut him off coldly. "It shows 20 minutes of you 3 tormenting a disabled veteran. It shows you stealing his mobility aid. It shows you assaulting him and then lying about it to law enforcement. So unless you want to add resisting arrest to your charges, I suggest you put your hands behind your back." Now, Officer Torres moved forward with handcuffs as Derek, Kyle, and Austin realized their situation was hopeless. One by one, they were cuffed and led toward the patrol cars, their earlier arrogance completely shattered. As Torres loaded them into the vehicles, Carson turned his attention to Tank and the gathered bikers. "I appreciate you gentlemen stepping in to help, but I have to ask, 45 of you, that's a lot of backup for a gas station incident." Tank's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "We were on our way to a veterans memorial ride about 50 miles north of here. Stopped at the light on the highway and saw what was happening through the fence. Figured we'd take a detour." "A veterans memorial ride," Carson repeated, his tone shifting. "Which memorial?" "The one for Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell," Tank said, and the words landed in the parking lot like a physical weight. Carson's eyes widened. He turned slowly to Bobby. "Robert Mitchell? Bobby Mitchell? You're that Robert Mitchell?" Bobby's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean by that, Robert Mitchell." "I'm just Robert Mitchell, just," Tank interjected, his voice rising. "Deputy, this man right here is a decorated combat veteran. 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and a Silver Star for valor. He saved 12 members of his convoy when an IED detonated on their route. Held off enemy combatants for 40 minutes while evac arrived, even after losing his sight in the blast. He's the reason 12 families still have their sons, brothers, and fathers. Carson removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. I knew the name. I didn't make the connection. Sir, he addressed Bobby directly, I apologize. You shouldn't have had to go through what happened here today. Apologies don't change what happened, Bobby said quietly. But I appreciate the sentiment. Tank stepped closer to Carson, his voice low but carrying to everyone present. Deputy, that memorial ride we're on, it's not for someone who died. It's for him. He gestured to Bobby. Every year on the anniversary of the ambush, we ride to honor the men who survived and the 3 who didn't. Bobby Mitchell's name is on a plaque at the memorial alongside his fallen brothers. We ride to make sure nobody forgets their sacrifice. The revelation rippled through the parking lot. Eddie, standing near the store entrance, looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The few customers who had remained to watch from a distance exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Torres, loading the last of the 3 young men into the patrol car, paused and looked back at Bobby with new understanding. Those 3 punks, Tank continued, his voice hardening. They saw a blind man and thought he was weak, thought he was someone they could push around for their entertainment. They didn't see a soldier. They didn't see a hero. They saw a disability and decided that made him less than human. Carson nodded slowly. I understand. And I assure you they're going to face consequences. The DA's going to hear about every second of what they did. Good, Tank said. Because men like Bobby deserve better than what this town gave him today. He stood alone in this parking lot for 20 minutes while people looked away. That's not the America we served. That's not the America we fought for. One of the other bikers, an older man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much, spoke up. Some of us were in Vietnam. Some were in Iraq. Some in Afghanistan. Different wars, different times, but we all took the same oath. And part of that oath means you don't turn your back when a brother needs help. Bobby felt his throat tighten. He'd been alone for so long, carrying his burden by himself, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have people stand beside him. These men, these strangers who rode motorcycles and wore leather and probably scared half the people they encountered, had done what an entire town full of so-called decent citizens had refused to do. Thank you, Bobby said, his voice rough with emotion. All of you. You didn't have to stop. You could have kept riding, but you stopped. And that, he paused, searching for words adequate to express what he felt. That means more than you know. Tank placed a heavy hand on Bobby's shoulder. Brother will always stop. That's what being part of a brotherhood means. You're never alone. Not while we're still riding. Carson cleared his throat. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. But given what you've been through today, we can do it tomorrow if you'd prefer. I'll do it now, Bobby said firmly. I want this on record. I want everyone to know exactly what happened here. Understood. I'll give you a ride. Actually, Tank interjected, if it's all right with you, Deputy, I'd like to escort Bobby myself. I think he's earned the right to arrive at the station with proper backup. Carson considered this, then nodded. I don't see why not. We'll meet you there. As the patrol cars pulled away with Derek, Kyle, and Austin in custody, Tank guided Bobby toward his motorcycle. You ever ridden before? Bobby smiled faintly. Not since I lost my sight. Then it's about time you did. Nothing like the wind in your face to remind you you're alive. Around them, the other 44 bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life in a symphony of power and solidarity. And as Bobby climbed onto the back of Tank's Harley, holding on as they prepared to ride, he realized that sometimes justice didn't come from the law, or from institutions, or from the people you expected to help. Sometimes it came from strangers who understood what it meant to stand together when standing alone was no longer enough. The convoy of motorcycles rolled through downtown Greenfield like a parade nobody had planned, but everyone stopped to watch. 45 Harleys moving in formation, their engines creating a thunder that echoed off storefronts and rattled windows. People emerged from shops and restaurants, shading their eyes against the afternoon sun to witness the procession. At the center of it all, Bobby Mitchell rode behind Tank Wheeler. the wind whipping past his face, carrying with it a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. They pulled up to the police station in a choreographed display of chrome and leather. The bikes formed neat rows in the parking lot, their riders dismounting in near-perfect unison. Deputy Carson was already there, waiting by the entrance with a tablet in his hand and an expression that suggested he was still processing everything that had happened. Inside the station, Bobby gave his statement in a small conference room, while Tank and several other bikers waited in the lobby. The process took nearly 2 hours, walking through every detail, every word spoken, every moment of humiliation. Bobby's voice remained steady throughout, his military training serving him well as he recounted the events with precision and clarity. When he finished, Carson set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that what happened to you today, it's unacceptable. Those 3 men are being charged with multiple offenses, and I'm personally going to make sure the district attorney understands the full scope of what they did." "I appreciate that, Deputy," Bobby replied. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about those 3 kids. They're symptoms of a bigger problem. People see the disability before they see the person. They see what I can't do instead of what I've done. And when something like today happens, most people turn away because getting involved is inconvenient or uncomfortable." Carson was quiet for a moment. "You're right. And I don't have a good answer for that, except to say that you've reminded this town of something it should never have forgotten." "What's that?" "That character isn't measured by what you look like or what limitations you have. It's measured by what you do when nobody's watching. And by that measure, you showed more character in that parking lot than most people show in a lifetime." When Bobby emerged from the conference room, Tank was there waiting. "All done?" "All done," Bobby confirmed. "Good, because there's something we need to show you." They walked outside to find that the number of motorcycles had grown. Word had spread through the veteran community, and more riders had arrived. Local veterans, members of other motorcycle clubs, even a few civilians who had served and heard what happened. The parking lot was now filled with over 70 bikes, their riders standing in respectful silence. Tank led Bobby to the center of the formation. "Brother, we were on our way to the memorial when we stopped at that gas station. We were riding in your honor. And just because we got detoured doesn't mean we're stopping now. We want you to lead us there." Bobby's throat tightened. I can't drive." "You're not driving," Tank said. "You're riding with me. But you're leading us. Your presence, your story, that's what we're honoring today. Not just what happened in Afghanistan, but what you survived today. Both took courage. Both deserve recognition. The ride to the memorial took 40 minutes. They traveled through town, then out onto rural highways, where the summer corn stood tall in the fields. Bobby felt every turn, every acceleration, every moment of the journey. The wind carried away the stress of the day, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The memorial itself stood in a small park on the outskirts of a neighboring town. A granite wall bore the names of local service members who had fallen in various conflicts. Off to one side stood a newer addition, a bronze plaque commemorating the Kandahar ambush. 3 names were listed as those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Below them, a 4th section listed those who had survived but carried the scars of that day. Bobby Mitchell's name was there along with 11 others. As the motorcycles pulled into the parking area, Bobby heard another sound. Voices, lots of them. The memorial ceremony that had been scheduled had drawn a crowd of several hundred people. Veterans, families, community members. When they saw the convoy arriving, a murmur rippled through the gathering. Tank helped Bobby off the bike and guided him toward the memorial. A microphone had been set up, and a local VFW commander was in the middle of speaking. When he saw Bobby approaching, he paused mid-sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the commander said, his voice cracking slightly, "we have a very special guest with us today. Please welcome Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell." The applause started immediately, building into a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Bobby stood there, his white cane in hand, his face tilted slightly upward as if he could see the faces of those clapping for him. He'd spent so many years feeling invisible, forgotten, diminished by his disability. And now, in this moment, he felt seen in a way that transcended physical sight. When the applause finally died down, Tank stepped up to the microphone. "Most of you know me. I'm Tank Wheeler, and I've been riding with the Hells Angels for 30 years. Every year, we do this ride to honor veterans like Bobby. But today, something happened that I need to tell you about." He recounted the events at the gas station, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. He didn't spare any details: the mockery, the stolen cane, the bystanders who looked away. With each revelation, the crowd's mood shifted from celebratory to somber to angry. "But here's the thing," Tank continued. "Those 3 punks who harassed Bobby, they're going to face consequences. The law is handling that. What I want to talk about is everyone else. The people who saw what was happening and did nothing. The store owner who watched from inside and didn't call for help until it was almost too late. The customers who drove away rather than get involved." He paused, letting his words sink in. Every one of those people told themselves a story about why it wasn't their problem. "Too busy, not my business. Someone else will handle it." But here's the truth. When you see someone being victimized and you turn away, you're not neutral. You're complicit. You're telling the victim they don't matter enough for you to risk even mild discomfort. The crowd was completely silent now. The only sound, the rustle of the wind through the trees. "Bobby Mitchell served this country with honor," Tank said. "He sacrificed his sight, protecting his brothers in arms. He saved 12 lives at the cost of his own vision. And today, he stood alone in a parking lot while people drove past and pretended not to see. That's not the America I fought for. That's not the America any of us fought for." He turned to Bobby. "Brother, you want to say anything?" Bobby stepped up to the microphone, his hands gripping his cane. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet but firm. "I don't tell this story often," he began. "The story of how I lost my sight. But I think today people need to hear it." He described the ambush in detail, the explosion, the chaos, the screaming of wounded men. He talked about making the decision to hold their position even as his world went dark, relying on sound and memory to direct his team. He spoke of the 40 minutes that felt like 40 hours, fighting an enemy he couldn't see, protecting men he couldn't afford to lose. "I did what I did because those men were my brothers," Bobby said. "And you don't abandon your brothers. Not ever. Not when it's hard. Not when it's dangerous. Not when it would be easier to save yourself." He turned his face toward where he sensed the crowd. "Today I needed brothers. I needed someone to stand with me when I couldn't stand alone. And strangers, men I'd never met, stopped their lives and surrounded me with protection. They did what the people of my own town wouldn't do. They saw me not as a disability or an inconvenience, but as someone worth defending." His voice grew stronger. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this because tomorrow you're going to see someone who needs help. Maybe it's someone being harassed. Maybe it's someone struggling with something that seems small to you, but is overwhelming to them. And in that moment, you're going to have a choice. You can look away and tell yourself it's not your problem. Or you can be someone's brother. You can be the person who stops and stands and says, 'Not here, not today, not while I'm watching.'" The silence that followed was profound. Then slowly people began to applaud again. But this time it was different, not celebratory, but thoughtful, acknowledging. As the ceremony continued, Bobby stood beside Tank and felt something shift inside himself. The anger and hurt from the gas station hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something else, a purpose. A reminder that his story mattered, that his voice could reach people, that his experience, both the sacrifice and the struggle, had meaning beyond his own survival. When the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, dozens approached Bobby. Veterans shook his hand. Parents introduced their children. People apologized, even those who hadn't been at the gas station, as if they were apologizing on behalf of everyone who had ever looked away. And through it all, The Hells Angels stood in a protective circle, ensuring Bobby was never alone again. The video went viral within 24 hours. Someone at the memorial had recorded Tank's speech and Bobby's testimony on their phone, and by the next morning it had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms. The security footage from Miller's Gas and Go somehow leaked online as well, showing the full 20 minutes of harassment in stark, undeniable detail. The comments section became a battleground of opinions. Some people praised the Hells Angels for their intervention. Others debated whether 45 bikers surrounding 3 men constituted intimidation, regardless of the circumstances. But the overwhelming majority focused on the bystanders, the people who had driven away, the store owner who had hesitated, the delivery driver who had walked past without a word. "This is what's wrong with society," read one comment with 15,000 likes. "We've become a nation of witnesses instead of participants." Another wrote, "I'm a veteran, and this brought me to tears." "We talk about supporting the troops, but where's that support when they come home and need us?" Local news picked up the story by the second day. Reporters descended on Greenfield, interviewing residents, tracking down witnesses from the gas station, requesting statements from the police department. Derek, Kyle, and Austin's mugshots appeared on television screens across the region. Their names and faces now permanently associated with cruelty and cowardice. Eddie Ramirez, the gas station owner, closed his store for 3 days after someone spray-painted "coward" across his front window. When he finally reopened, he found a protest organized by local veterans outside his business. They weren't violent or destructive, they simply stood there in silence, holding signs that read, "Witnesses have responsibility and service deserves respect." On the 4th day, Eddie appeared on local news with a prepared statement. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking as he held the paper. "I want to apologize publicly to Robert Mitchell," he read. "I witnessed what happened at my gas station, and I failed to act with the urgency and courage the situation demanded. I told myself I was going to call the police, but I waited, hoping someone else would handle it. By the time I did call, the situation had escalated far beyond what it should have been. Mr. Mitchell deserved better from me, from my business, and from this community. I'm deeply sorry," he paused, swallowing hard. "Going forward, Miller's Gas and Go will be a safe space for veterans and anyone facing harassment. I'm implementing new policies, including immediate law enforcement contact for any harassment incidents and mandatory intervention training for all employees. I'm also donating 10% of our profits for the next year to veteran support organizations. This doesn't undo what happened, but I hope it's a start toward making things right." The woman who had tried to intervene but ultimately walked away also came forward. Her name was Margaret Chen, a retired schoolteacher. She recorded a video message that was shared widely online. "I saw what was happening," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I tried to help, but when those young men threatened me, I got scared and I left. I've been a teacher for 35 years. I've stood up to bullies in hallways and classrooms. But in that parking lot, I convinced myself it was too dangerous, that I'd done enough by trying. The truth is I was scared, and I used that fear as permission to abandon someone who needed help." She wiped at her eyes. "Watching that video of Mr. Mitchell standing there alone after I drove away, it's haunted me every moment since. I should have called 911 from my car. I should have stayed and documented what was happening. I should have done something other than leave. To Mr. Mitchell, I'm so deeply sorry. And to everyone watching this, please learn from my mistake. Don't let fear convince you that walking away is acceptable. Find another way to help, but don't just drive away." 3 weeks after the incident, the town of Greenfield held a community meeting at the high school gymnasium. Over 800 people attended, filling the bleachers and spilling out into the hallways. Bobby sat on the stage alongside Tank, Deputy Carson, and several community leaders. The meeting was heated at times. Some people defended their inaction, arguing that ordinary citizens shouldn't be expected to confront dangerous situations. Others acknowledged their failures and pledged to do better. Veterans spoke about feeling invisible in their own communities. Parents talked about what they wanted their children to learn from this incident. Near the end of the meeting, a young man stood up in the back. He was maybe 25, wearing a work shirt with an auto shop logo. His voice shook as he spoke. "I was there," he said. "At the gas station. I was putting air in my tires, and I saw everything. I didn't do anything. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I didn't want to get involved. I finished my tires, and I drove away." He paused, struggling to continue. "I'm a veteran too. I served in Iraq, and I drove past another veteran who needed help because it was easier than getting involved. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for that. But I want Mr. Mitchell to know that I'm sorry, and I promise that I will never look away again." Bobby stood and asked someone to guide him to where the young man was standing. When he reached him, Bobby extended his hand. "What's your name, brother?" Jason Torres. Jason, you came here today and told the truth. That takes courage. You're not the same person who drove away from that gas station. You're someone who learned from it. That's all any of us can do, learn and do better." The two veterans embraced, and the gymnasium erupted in applause. By the end of the summer, Derek, Kyle, and Austin had each been sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years of probation, and 500 hours of community service, specifically with veteran support organizations. The judge's statement was scathing. "You three saw a man who sacrificed for this country and decided he was an acceptable target for your cruelty," she said from the bench. "You will now spend the next several years serving those you mocked. Perhaps in that service, you'll learn what real strength looks like." As for Bobby, his life changed in ways he couldn't have anticipated. He was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and veteran organizations. His message was always the same, that disability didn't define weakness, that service deserved respect, and that ordinary people had the power to change lives simply by refusing to look away. Tank and the Hells Angels became regular visitors to Greenfield. They organized monthly rides through town, stopping at schools and businesses to talk about brotherhood, service, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The local chapter of the VFW tripled in membership. The town established a veteran support hotline. Miller's Gas and Go became known as one of the most welcoming places in the county for veterans and people with disabilities. 6 months after the incident, Bobby received a call from the mayor's office. The town wanted to name a street after him, not because of what happened at the gas station, but because of what he'd done in Afghanistan and what he was doing now to change his community. Bobby declined the honor, but suggested an alternative. Name the street after the 3 men who had died in the ambush. Let their sacrifice be remembered in a permanent way. The proposal was approved unanimously. On a cool autumn evening, Bobby stood at the dedication ceremony for Bronze Star Way, a newly renamed street in downtown Greenfield. Tank stood beside him, along with family members of the fallen soldiers. The crowd that gathered was massive, easily over 1,000 people. Many wearing leather vests with patches that told stories of their own service and brotherhood. As Bobby ran his fingers over the raised letters on the street sign, he thought about everything that had led to this moment. The cruelty at the gas station, the intervention by strangers who became brothers, the community that had been forced to confront its own failures, the slow, difficult work of turning pain into purpose. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Tank said quietly, standing beside him. "What's that?" "You're not invisible anymore." "None of us are. People see us now, really see us. And they're starting to understand that seeing isn't enough. You have to act on what you see." Bobby nodded slowly. "It shouldn't have taken what happened to me to teach that lesson. No, it shouldn't have. But it did. And now thousands of people are living differently because you stood in that parking lot and refused to be ashamed of who you are. That's not nothing, brother. That's everything." As the sun set over Greenfield, Bobby Mitchell stood surrounded by people who saw him not as a disability or a victim or even just a hero, but as a complete human being deserving of dignity, respect, and the basic decency that should be afforded to everyone. The road ahead was still long, still difficult, but he was no longer walking it alone, and in the end, that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.